Hey guys, welcome to my increasingly desperate attempt to not be horrendously backlit. I guess this is what's happening now. Welcome to a wall that will be filled with various book covers during the portion of this video. This is another one of my supplementals episodes for my reading challenge to read at least one biography on every single American president. And like I have been saying, there have been some moments where I have stopped and lingered or gone back and read some books, whatever it is. But I will put the link to the playlist, obviously, on this video, so you can start from the beginning. The supplementals videos don't have to be watched in any order. I guess the presidents don't really either, but I'm trying to go in order. I'm trying really hard. So, today's episode has no fun title. This is just some extras on Truman, Kennedy, and Johnson. That's Harry S. Truman, John F. Kennedy, and Lyndon B. Johnson. Why extras on those? No particular reason. Sometimes I read these books because I'm interested. Sometimes I'm just waiting for holds to come through on the library's e-catalog, and this is just what I happen to read. Anyway, with that being said, I'm going to try to do these in order of presidential term, but other than that, it's pretty loose here. But so Harry S. Truman comes first in this lineup, and the biography that I read for Harry S. Truman was David McCullough's Truman. Took me months and months and months and months and months to get through that book. I haven't made a video about that quite yet, but we're getting there. Whew, that was a doozy. Anyway, way back, like 2 years ago, when I was first starting this process, I read a book called The General and the President, MacArthur and Truman at the Brink of Nuclear War by H.W. Brands. This was rather random. I can't honestly tell you why I chose to read this book. I think I was just curious. So this really drills down into Harry S. Truman's relationship with the General Douglas MacArthur, who is a colorful person in his own right and really deserves his own biography video, whatever, because he's a fascinating human being. But I didn't do that. This book functions as a moderate dual biography, obviously never to the level that David McCullough will get into when he writes Truman, which is like over 800 pages. H.W. Brands certainly isn't concise anyway, but you get background on Harry S. Truman and his presidency, you get background on Douglas MacArthur and his rise through the military, and what they were both doing for World War II and then after. This book is really focused on the after of World War II, although the issues with MacArthur and Truman start during World War II, obviously, when Truman becomes president, when FDR dies. This book is fascinating for me because I didn't know anything about Douglas MacArthur. I do wonder if someone who knows a bit about him would like this book. I think there are people who are really strongly either proponents of MacArthur or detractors of MacArthur, and this book does seem to come out on the side of Harry Truman. So I don't know if that's a thing you have an opinion on, but I think H.W. Brands comes out on Harry Truman's side and really does see Douglas MacArthur as this person who really just got fame hungry and got a little bit too big for his britches and just decided that he knew right all the time. Douglas MacArthur does do amazing things during the Korean War, but he's also involved in some pretty big scandals. So take that as you will with a grain of salt. I don't remember too many of the particulars, like I said, because I read this so long ago, but I definitely remember closing it and thinking, oh, I need to read a book now that's pro MacArthur. I haven't done that yet. I got sidetracked by the actual presidential challenge that kind of crept up around this time, so I don't know. There's that view on that book. Most of these books, I'm going to be honest, are about the Kennedys because it is really easy to find lots of books on JFK, his presidency, his family, etc., etc. They're considered American royalty. You know, American political royalty as close as we're going to get since, you know, we don't have a king anymore, although we seem really interested in the British Queen and that royal family. So whatever. Here we go. The first one I'm going to mention is a newer release. This is The House of Kennedy by James Patterson and Cynthia Fagan. And this is one of the newer nonfiction books from James Patterson, and it is notable for the fact that it's not just focused on JFK. It gives equal billing to other Kennedys such as RFK, Joe Kennedy, and Ted Kennedy as well. So that was really nice because many of the Kennedy books, if they're not specifically about a separate Kennedy, tend to focus around JFK and then everyone else is peripheral, obviously because he was the president who was murdered. So it makes sense to make him often the focus of these books, but House of Kennedy does not do that. The thing that it does that really bothers me is that it leans in really hardcore to a lot of things that are considered conspiracy theories. So for example, it goes, and that's when Jack met Marilyn Monroe, and then everything happened, wink, wink. And it just ends up, like, whether or not these things are true, it just ends up making it feel like it's just sensationalizing all of these conspiracy theories and then just going wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like, you know what really happened. And I'm like, why is this happening? Why? This is a nonfiction book, not a tabloid. So, I mean, if you're interested in the Kennedys, I would consider this like a book you could read. I wouldn't call it must-reads for anybody. It goes very narrowly into several major Kennedy moments that you can find much better descriptions of elsewhere. So it's a thing if you read a lot about the Kennedys and you want another thing to read, but I really wouldn't recommend it to anybody who's interested in an actual nonfiction book that will explain things to you. So do with that what you will. The next two are both biographies on Bobby Kennedy, or RFK, who was JFK's younger brother, who was also assassinated when he ran for president. So I got interested in Bobby Kennedy because Netflix did this series, I believe it would have been on the 50th anniversary of his death or something a couple of years ago, and it was called Bobby Kennedy for President, and it's still on Netflix. I think it's really, really good. The late great John Lewis shows up on there and talks about Bobby, and I think there's a really interesting dichotomy between JFK and RFK and how, you know, RFK really came to embody viscerally many of the liberal things that JFK claimed to have stood for but never super argued for. I don't know, this is a point of debate for Kennedy scholars. I'm not going to get into it. But both of these books take on a lot of that side of Bobby Kennedy. And one of them I feel is much better than the other, so if you're at all interested, here are my thoughts. So there's Bobby Kennedy, The Making of a Liberal Icon by Larry Tye, and Bobby Kennedy, A Raging Spirit by Chris Matthews. The Chris Matthews book is newer. I believe it was released specifically for the anniversary of his death, life, whatever it was that Netflix made the documentary for. The Tye is older. The thing about the Tye, though, is that it is much more interested in explaining the younger Bobby Kennedy. The younger Bobby Kennedy is an enigma in himself. He worked for Joe McCarthy. He really seemed to stand on some conservative principles. He seemed to really be like a really rough, gruff, in-your-face, like, scrapper. And after, you know, his time in the White House with JFK and his brother's death, he really does transform into a liberal icon, as Tye says, who is maybe more of a liberal icon than his brother really ended up being, although his brother will always be remembered as one because he actually was president. So the Tye takes the time to explain the transformation, to say that when he was younger, Bobby Kennedy really did believe things that he came to educate himself on, whereas the Matthews takes this earlier problematic parts of Bobby's life and says, well, he did it, but in his heart, he knew it was wrong. And it's a very subtle shift, and I don't know if I would have noticed it if I hadn't read these books kind of back to back. But it leaves me with the impression that the Chris Matthews book is a far more laudatory book, right? Like, Bobby Kennedy is great, was great, will always be great. As opposed to the Ty, which says, you know, he wasn't always great, but he became better. And that, I think, is a far more interesting book to me. So if you're interested at all in reading about Bobby Kennedy and you're choosing between these two books, there are obviously tons more of them. I would choose the Ty over the Matthews any day. Ty also focuses more on Bobby Kennedy. Chris Matthews is a writer about JFK first and foremost, but wrote this book about Bobby, like, based on research he'd mostly done around JFK, so I think Ty takes more time with Bobby, whereas the Matthews relates more tangential evidence. So I know that this is a big burning debate for you about which Bobby Kennedy book to read. Let me settle that for you. There. Congratulations. Super. And the last book that I'm going to talk about today, because I don't have a ton from this time period, is a book called Lady Bird and Lyndon, The Hidden Story of a Marriage That Made a President by Betty Caroli. So this is technically a First Lady book looking at Lady Bird, who was the wife of Lyndon Johnson, and how she came to marry Johnson, her role in the White House, and really how their marriage propped up his political career, his life, and his presidency, and what Lady Bird had to do to achieve all of that. She is a really fascinating First Lady. She was definitely a power horse in her own right. And Lyndon Johnson is a fascinating man. And it was really interesting to read this book prior to reading my actual biography on Lyndon Baines Johnson, or LBJ, which was Doris Kearns Goodwin's book on LBJ, because Doris Kearns Goodwin and Betty Caroli are both women, as one might guess, but Doris Kearns Goodwin doesn't mention a lot of the behavior that is often mentioned about LBJ and is often mentioned in how he treated his wife and what his wife had to put up with. So I'm fascinated in the differences between the two, and I'm really, really glad that I read this book, because Lady Bird is such a small presence in the LBJ biography that I read, when really I think she deserves a lot more. So if you're at all interested in a book that is complimentary but not whitewashing of LBJ, not that Doris Kearns Goodwin, you know, really wallpapers over his more problematic issues, but this one really digs into it in a more interesting way and really talks about that effect on the woman closest to him. So worth reading, and I'm glad that I did. So like I said, that's all for today for these books. My next Supplementals episode, which I'll film at some point, is on Nixon, and I read 9 books on Nixon, so it'll be much longer and much sadder, because Nixon, I went down a rabbit hole. I can't explain it to you. But I hope that you found this fun, and I am currently in the middle of reading An Unfinished Life by Robert Dallek on JFK, and also listening to a book on Ronald Reagan, and reading the ebook of a book on James Monroe. So hopefully I'll have another actual President's episode ready for you guys sometime soon. But thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye!